So in your opinion, was this decision not to press charges the right one in this case?
It absolutely was. I mean, from the start, we need to get politics out of the investigation of police activities when it comes to criminal matters and use of force. These investigations are based on the law, policies and procedures, and the evidence, and that's where it should stand. But when we've seen what happens time and time again, when politics gets involved with this and creates this mass hysteria before the facts are out. Now, this case, they were called to the domestic district. They did find out there was a warrant for this individual for a past domestic abuse and sexual assault on the victim. He did fight with them. He placed one officer in a headlock. Two tasers were deployed to restrain him, to try and subdue so they can arrest him. He did have a knife in his hand. In the video, it was clearly shown, and witness statements said that they continually heard the police to tell him to drop the knife. And as he came around the front of the car, you could see the knife clearly in his right hand. He reached in the car. The mother, the victim in this case, who called police originally, said, "He has my keys and he has my children." They thought a kidnapping was about to take place. And when he reached in the car, they didn't know what kind of other weapon. They knew he had a knife in his hand. They fired several shots. That's where the evidence lies, and that's where it went. Now, this case went through several layers. Not only did the local authorities look at this, but the state governor placed the Wisconsin Department of Investigation to be the primary investigative agency in this, which is a state agency, had no local ties. And from there, the state attorney general asked a retired sheriff to review their findings before it went back to the district attorney of Kenosha, Wisconsin. And based on all that evidence and all these layers of investigation, they determined that these officers did act properly within their procedures and did have the right to use the force they did.
It's just so shocking to me, and I guess, well, I probably shouldn't be shocked anymore after everything we've seen this past year, but the DA in this case even claims that this is a tragedy for Jacob Blake and his family, the shooting. And I'm just sitting here wondering, after everything that you mentioned with the knife and the tasers and the struggle with police, but even going back before that, why he had the restraining order in the first place, the sexual assault, as you mentioned, against the girlfriend when she was home with her children in her house, and he comes in the door and he does very inappropriate things to her. He then takes her keys in that case as well. I believe it was 2019, or earlier actually in 2020. He takes the keys from her, he takes her credit cards, he threatens her, and that's what resulted in the restraining order in the first place. And then in August of 2020, so just a few months later, he comes back and does the exact same thing to her, minus the sexual assault, but he comes back to take her keys and to threaten her once more. And the Democrats, they claim to be the party of women, and yet here you have a woman that they've thrown completely under the bus.
Yeah, and let's play it through another way. Say the police officers let him get in the car with those children, let him leave with them. He had a weapon. He obviously has an ongoing dispute with their mother, these children's mother. What if he harmed them? What if he simply got into a car accident and killed them? They would blame the police didn't do enough. And the mother of these children would have the same multi-million-dollar lawsuit that Mr. Blake has now against the police for not protecting her children. So it's a no-win situation for the local police when politics get involved in police matters. There's no place for it, and it's continuing to spread across the nation, where these politicians jump the gun and say something before the facts are out, embed themselves, create this mass hysteria, and now you have a governor paying hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to deploy the National Guard for something that should never have been to begin with.
And given your own experience in law enforcement, what goes through an officer's mind when they're dealing with such an agitated suspect, an armed suspect? They don't know what could happen. Just in Kenosha, 2 weeks before the shooting of Jacob Blake, another police officer was in fact shot by a suspect as he was checking out cars in the area after a suspicious call had come in. And so a lot's going through the officer's mind in that situation. But given your experience, what is an officer feeling before they're forced to pull the trigger in such a circumstance?
Anytime an officer pulls the trigger, it's a tragedy to their mind. It's something they have to live with for the rest of their life. It's a burden they carry for the rest of their lives. No officer leaves their house that morning, put on the uniform and badge and a gun and say, I want to hurt somebody today. I want to kill someone today. So it's a tragic situation for them. Any time police need to use deadly physical force, it's a tragedy for all involved. But there's choices to be made. This individual, Mr. Blake, had a choice to surrender. He had a choice not to put a police officer in a headlock, not to have that knife in his hand. And, standard operating procedure for police officers is there's a 21-foot rule if someone has a bladed object like a knife. They were within feet and then sometimes inches of this individual. There's no time for that thinking. At any moment, in less than a second, he could have swung around with that knife and it would have been deadly to that officer. So, there's a multitude of things that go through an officer's head in that split-second decision that the public and politicians have, days, weeks, and months to contemplate and come up with their scenario and what only happened in a millisecond.